What you see is the ceremony of the Darcy Ribeiro Prize, the most important award granted by the Brazilian Congress in the area of education. It was given in 2007 to the Brazilian Campaign for the Right to Education for having created the basic education fund, FUNDEB. FUNDEB has already ensured more than $30 billion for basic public education in Brazil, benefiting nearly 50 million students. Anyone seeing this would think that its approval was a simple thing. But the truth is that civil society, coordinated by the campaign, had to engage Congress in intense debates, support and oppose government proposals, build and mobilize important partnerships, and spark the interest of the entire population. Brazil's 1988 Constitution ensures education as the right of everyone and the duty of government and family. In 1998, a law that would expire in 2006 was enacted, ensuring federal, state, and municipal funds for the primary school system that goes from the 1st to the 9th grade, educating children between the ages of 6 and 14. It was the law that created the Fundamental Education Fund, FUNDEB. As for the Basic Education Fund, it was one of many demands made by society that became a campaign promise of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was sworn in as President of Brazil in 2003. Introduced to Congress in June of 2005 to replace FUNDEB, it benefits a much wider age group, students aged 4 to 17 in preschool and in fundamental and middle education schools. It also ensures the education of youths and adults. But civil society had much more ambitious expectations. It wanted the inclusion of daycare centers for children between the ages of 0 and 3, sufficient public investment per student to guarantee quality education, a national minimum wage for education professionals, and more federal government resources for the fund. Created in 1999, the Brazilian Campaign for the Right to Education is a social network whose aim is to guarantee everyone's right to quality public education. It is directed by 10 civil society organizations of different kinds: social movements, NGOs, labor unions, foundations, public administrators, and counselors. Today, the campaign has 4 professionals on its administration and 19 regional committees in 18 states. It led the FUNDEB pra Valer, or FUNDEB for Real movement, and gained renown as an important force to be reckoned with by the executive and legislative branches of government. There were 6 action strategies. Institutional articulation. Some organizations participated in public events. Several signed support documents. Many mobilized their local bases of support, and others acted directly in the command of the movement. Mobilization. It ensures the social base for the actions to be undertaken, demonstrating that there are political individuals who are active. FUNDEB pra Valer's mobilization brought a blend of irreverence and popular art to political actions. Communication. Promotes the connection, meeting, and exchange of ideas among FUNDEB pra Valer's members, helping to strengthen feelings of belonging. Gives the external public a clear picture of political stances. All this requires speed and quality content. Advocacy. Several actions were undertaken. Public hearings in Congress, meetings with government officials and congressmen, surprise visits to congressmen's offices, public acts, publishing the names of absent congressmen, correspondence to leaders, flood of emails and postcards supporting FUNDEB, lighting candles in Brasilia's Esplanade of Ministries. Knowledge production. It provides consistent technical argumentation to back the actions. The documents helped convince legislators and allowed them to analyze the proposals quickly. They also helped gain credibility vis-à-vis political parties, institutional partners, and the media. Formation of social actors. The direct participation in actions and discussions on local and national levels resulted in the formation of new social actors and enriched the experience of those who were already politically active. Many activists learned how to debate arid themes like the financing of education. At FUNDEB, there were 3 phases: debating the proposal with the executive branch, the process for the approval of the constitutional amendment that created the new fund, the process leading to the executive order that enabled the fund. The first challenge was to put together a large group of organizations supporting a list of demands. Of the many ideas discussed, the creation of daycare centers became the aggregating factor. The idea attracted business institutes, children rights activists, women rights movements, feminists, and attorneys who joined forces with education activists. A good, punchy logo helps create a collective identity. It has to be easily and quickly understood and synthesize the movement and its spirit. Notice that the baby is not crying for affection or attention. It is demanding its rights. A teleconference proposed by the campaign allowed the entire country to take part in the debate with the Minister of Education and his executive secretary. This strengthened the institutional articulation and the relationship with allies inside the government. It also attracted new partners and helped local personnel become more qualified for their jobs. Events and debates throughout Brazil helped the movement achieve a nationwide presence and made congressmen more aware of the needs of their constituencies. The FUNDEB Pra Valer was launched in Congress in a baby carriage and rattle-packed event that underscored the strength of the movement and especially of women. It conquered space in the media, attracted the attention of legislators and public opinion, demonstrating the emergence of a pluralistic movement that joined forces with a united and organized civil society to demand the creation of the new fund. A permanent agenda with clearly defined deadlines and objectives was of fundamental importance over a period of 3 years. This is what kept such a heterogeneous group united and mobilized. The movement elaborates its strategies independent of the party in power, its origins, or its campaign promises. A redefinition of the forces in play in government and Congress was made at the conclusion of each stage. Friend and foes could be found in all the parties. The interest of municipal, state, and federal governments conflicted with the rights of citizens. States and municipalities competed for more FUNDEB funds and feared the negative impact on their budgets. Major differences existed inside the federal government, where the finance ministry, determined to lower public spending, fought the education ministry, which wanted more funds. One episode that had a strong positive impact took place on the day when the movement placed a child on the finance minister's lap. It was during the public hearing in which he announced that the federal government agreed to the inclusion of daycare centers and would give FUNDEB an additional $100 million. When the federal government presented its first project, the group analyzed the text, formulated criticisms and strategies, but never proposed its total rejection or replacement. The criticisms presented were always specific, to the point, and well-grounded. The movement quickly learned the dynamics of Congress that demanded constant reinterpretations of the political scenario and immediate action. For example, in June of 2006, Congress was conducting its business at an extremely slow pace because of the general elections and the World Cup in Germany. To get things moving, the movement created Gol pela Educação, or Score a Goal for Education, a campaign involving major Brazilian sports personalities. 2 weeks later, the Senate approved the law and returned it to the lower house Chamber of Deputies for final approval. They were difficult times. In the world of politics, nothing mattered other than the elections. The first phase of the amendment passing process had to be concluded that year, because in 2007, there would be a new Congress. After the constitutional amendment was ratified, approval had to be obtained for its enabling legislation that determined how the fund would function, how the money would be distributed, and what social control mechanisms would be needed. But because of the urgency of the matter, the government implemented FUNDEB's enabling legislation with an executive order. Through executive orders, measures that date back to the military dictatorship, the government makes Congress treat certain laws with urgency. Since an executive order's passage process is very quick, congressmen usually approve the text as is, without any alterations. This gives the presidency substantial power. With few financial resources and faced with a new Congress, half of whose members had just been elected, the campaign created an innovative methodology of legislative incidents. It put together a set of amendments to the executive order, complete with the proper legislative wording and synthetic analyses of the 231 proposals put forth by congressmen and senators. The material was easy to read and contained sound arguments that backed the legislators' decisions. As a result, nearly all of FUNDEB para Valer's proposals were approved and included in the enabling legislation. This methodology helped the campaign obtain an unprecedented conquest, for never before had civil society influenced the elaboration and approval of an executive order. The campaign's different strategies were activated quickly, at any moment, in accordance to the current conjuncture. One strategy nourishes and qualifies the other. A good working relationship with the media is of fundamental importance for any social mobilization. The different means of communication, TV, radio, the internet, and newspapers divulge to the entire population education-related matters and the acts and ideas of the FUNDEB para Valer movement. The stories were not always favorable or even impartial, but even so, obtaining time and space in the media was very important. Major newspapers are particularly important in efforts undertaken to pressure authorities. Whether they are sympathetic or not to a cause, journalists need reliable sources willing to help them with agility, solid technical arguments, or an evident display of political force. The movement offered itself to the media as a source of information. Overall, the media has been favorably inclined toward FUNDEB. Editorials and reports reminded the public that FUNDEB was on the congressional agenda and that its approval was being delayed. The movement faxed these articles to members of Congress. As important as the fund's approval was the public discussion it sparked. Never before was infantile education the subject of so much debate, which focused on its importance in a child's development and on the role it plays as a base for learning and socialization. Seeing the process from a distance provides us with valuable lessons. There are friends as well as foes in all political parties. Even congressmen who have long supported social movements are also committed to contrary positions defended by the local and federal governments. We must be constantly alert to deadlines and to the nature of the legislative process during each stage, for one deadline lost could destroy the chances of success. We must pay attention to the subtleties contained in the text of the law. Small changes in the wording could result in major changes in the project. It is important to occupy spaces in disputes between government and opposition. Every negotiation requires flexibility, but principles must always be preserved. The FUNDEB para Valer movement obtained several triumphs with the approval of the new fund. Inclusion of daycare centers. The law guarantees the right to education since birth. 13 million children between the ages of 0 and 3 will be able to receive an education. Resources. The federal government is obliged to invest more than $2.5 billion each year in FUNDEB. Quality education. The FUNDEB law calls for minimum public education standards. Valuing professionals. The FUNDEB law also determined that professors have the right to a national minimum wage. Social control. Several mechanisms enabling society to monitor and participate in the implementation of the fund. With the unprecedented participation of civil society, FUNDEB's approval represents an historic change in Brazilian education. And this encourages society to strive for new conquests. FUNDEB is a first and important step. Now, the Brazilian campaign for the right to education is investing in new horizons in an effort to guarantee that all Brazilians have access to quality public education.